Mr. Lahood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses today for your valuable testimony here. When we look at or review U.S. companies or U.S. businesses operating in China, I think it's important that we distinguish between two very different groups of U.S. companies. The first group is made up of what I would call legacy companies. These are your more mature businesses, often large multinational corporations that have been operating in China for decades, coming in at the beginning of China's economic rise. In many cases, these businesses have a distinct economic advantage in that they opened their operations in China during a time when China was effectively weaker and much more inclined to develop strong relationships and engage in fair and competitive economic practices. It is with these companies, though, where we're seeing or have seen a lot of concessions being made to the CCP to, quote, not rock the boat and disrupt the advantage of market access. We see examples of this with censorship in the film industry, a willingness to share or allow for the theft of personal data, the violation of civil liberties, and the turning of a blind eye to gross human rights violations. The second group, which I would describe as newer companies in the bioscience field, technology, AI, biomedical, medical tech, national security. These companies, ranging from mom and pop small businesses all the way up to large enterprises in these critical sectors that have to play by a different set of rules. But their concerns are obviously the risk of IP theft, coercion and duress from the CCP, and it seems to me that with these businesses operating under a different set of rules and standards, the CCP is focused on one thing: how do they replace the United States in many of these sectors? So, Ms. Lansbury, I'm wondering if you could comment on the distinction that I just made there, and then secondarily, as you work with businesses that are either just getting started in China or considering doing that, to what degree would you say these companies are pressured to make serious concessions to their values or business model to have the necessary market access to the CCP that maximizes their bottom line?
Thank you. To your first point on the established companies since the 80s, right? So a lot of these companies went in very early, as you said. I do think it's important to remember that there is a way the Chinese operate. I think Matt Pottinger might have spoken about this in the first hearing. The Chinese have a dual kind of way of communicating, and I think you will say one thing and do another. I think American companies who have been in China that long may, not always, but may be giving the impression when they're in country that they are abiding by or kowtowing, if you will, to Xi Jinping and or the party's demands. Whereas when back here and meeting with you all, you might hear a different story. I do know in Department of Commerce there are a number of industry advisory committees, and I think there's a way perhaps of this committee to hear more in closed doors with maybe some security clearance to try to get to the bottom of what these larger, more established companies are really going through as they're thinking about all of that investment, hundreds of millions of dollars per company in some of these cases. How do they reshore? How do they find resilience in supply chain without alerting their partners that this is something that they're going through? So that's something to look at. For the smaller companies, that's a tough one. I think, in my roles in advising small biotech companies, in being in that sector, watching what's happening with, AI and, in general, the strategic and emerging industries, the companies are hungry. They don't have the capital. So I also think that's a very dangerous area, and those companies are probably more willing and hungry to collaborate and find ways to exchange and give up IP. So I would be concerned for that area.
And Ms. Lansbury, these larger multinational corporations, many of them legacy companies, do any of them feel any shame for doing business in China?
I don't think I'm the best person to ask.
Well, maybe I'll ask.
I've met with many, many companies. There are some who went in, and I mean, even I started working on U.S.-China business when I was in my 20s and was very much a proponent of PNTR. I wanted to have China be part of the World Trade Organization. I wanted to see the trade negotiators have some success in, every 6 months, ticking off the checklist of all of the commitments that hadn't been done. It just wasn't happening. So shame, maybe just regret, I think. We aren't where we need to be.
Ms. Castor.